from the front of the bike, covering all the major components, working our way towards the back. So starting at the front, wheels, 3-spoke design wheel, very similar to the Gen 1 Hayabusa. I can't actually tell any difference myself, but I've been told they are slightly redesigned. Some people on the forums trying to work out whether you can swap the Gen 1 and Gen 2 wheels and interchange them, and it turns out they're quite difficult to do so. So they're basically the same wheel, might be some slight differences, and they are a 3-spoke design, very similar to the Gen 1. Moving on to the brakes. Now these are 4-pot Takiko calipers. They are radial brake calipers and 310mm discs. So these particular discs here are actually the smallest discs you can get between the Gen 1 and Gen 2, working from 99 all the way up to 2019. So I think there were 320mm on the Gen 1 and 320mm on the Gen 2.5, which is 2012 onwards, with the ABS and the Brembo 6-pot caliper. So with this particular design, you've got a 310mm disc and 4-pot calipers, and that's 2007 to 2012, non-ABS. The brakes on these bikes are actually really decent. You get a lot of comments saying that the braking system on the Hayabusa isn't that great, and it may be true when stock, but if you fit some braided lines on there, these are hell braided lines, and if you get some EBC HH sintered brake pads, they're actually not bad at all. And there's not much travel on the lever, there's a lot of feel. The sintered pads help a lot with the feel, and up top you've actually got a Nissin radial master cylinder up there, which also improves the braking feel as well, having that radial master cylinder. So we'll just cover some torque values while we're here. So right here you've got 2 bolts, one there, one here. They're 39 Newton meters. You've also got the sliding pins, one here and one here. Those are the 4 things you need to take off to remove this actual caliper from the disc and from its housing. So there's only 4 things there. You've got the sliding pins, which are 15 Newton meters. So for the forks, this bike's got 43mm inverted Kayaba forks, and if you look at the actual sliders here, they've got something called a DLC coating, which is diamond-like carbon, and obviously diamond is one of the hardest materials on the face of the planet. So you can actually see by looking at these here, they're in excellent condition. Now this bike has done 32,000 miles, it's had 7 owners. As you can tell by the finish on the discs, it's been used in all weather. It's had a fairly hard life, but the actual sliders, the forks themselves, are in very good condition. I've actually had these rebuilt with new fork oil, new seals and stuff, so they look in particularly good condition just now, but even before then they were in very good condition. There was a bit of a leak, that's why I had the seals changed, which after 30,000 miles on any bike you can expect the seals to have perished and be leaking a little bit of fluid. So I've had them rebuilt, but in particular the sliders, this is something that's very difficult to rectify, and you end up needing to replace the forks. So one thing that can be of peace of mind with this bike is the diamond-like carbon coating on the sliders really makes things easy to maintain. You don't need to have your fork seals replaced all the time. Once every 25,000 miles is more than enough with these particular bikes. Now, talking about adjusting your suspension, so you've got 3 things to adjust on the suspension. So down here, this is your compression adjustment. Now you adjust this with a flat blade screwdriver, and the way you do it is you insert your screwdriver and you turn it clockwise until it doesn't move anymore. So I'm going to turn this clockwise and you'll feel it click. So that's about a quarter of a turn there, and it clicked. Another quarter of a turn, clicks again. And if you keep going, and when you feel resistance, just come back to the last click, and that's, I believe that counts as 1. So that would be 1, 2, 3, and you keep going until you get 8 clicks, and then that's you stock for the compression. You've also got further adjustment up at the top of the suspension at the headstock here, so you've got more adjustment here. This is for the rebound damping, so that's the same. Turn it all the way clockwise until you feel resistance. Turn it back 1, 2, 3, and when you count to 8, that's you at stock. And obviously the same on the other side here. And then you need a 14mm socket to adjust the preload. So the top here is 0, you then have 1, 2, 3, and there is 5 lines on there, and when you can see 1, 2, 3.5 lines, so the third line and a little bit more metal there, that there is stock. And when you can't see the 4th line because it's depressed into the bike to the point where you can't see the 4th line but you can see the 3rd line, that there is stock settings. And it's the same on this side as well. So 0, first line's 1, second line's 2, third line's 3. There is a 4th and a 5th line, and to see those extra lines, you put your 14mm socket on there and you unwind, and it'll rise up, and then obviously clockwise to push it in, and that's how you adjust your preload. If you now look down in here, right down in there is your steering dampener. Now when I've been out on the bike, I've noticed the handling can be a little bit wayward when you go around corners at high speed. I do get a little bit of a shimmy on the bars, so one thing you might want to do with your Hayabusa is get an upgraded oil and steering damper with a little bit more resistance. But from stock it does have a steering damper, and for most scenarios it's more than adequate. So moving on to the bodywork, it's fully redesigned from the Generation 1 bike. It has incorporated indicators rather than indicators that stick out on the side. That improves aerodynamics. Up top you've got a slightly taller windscreen, although it is quite shallow, and some people do fit a double bubble windscreen. Myself in particular, I like to keep things as close to stock as possible. Obviously Suzuki have went through a great deal of trouble to make this bike as aerodynamic as possible, and I try to leave the bike fairly stock, and I don't really want to mess with all their hard work, because the bike is designed to be as slippery and as streamlined as it can be for that ultimate top speed. I know the technology is fairly old now, it's a 14-year-old bike, but it has been designed in a wind tunnel, and putting a double bubble screen on there just upsets everything. And one thing I have noticed is it does help with regards to having wind hitting your chest, which helps keep weight off your wrists when you're riding, because one thing with this bike is comfort isn't the best. It is meant to be a sports touring bike, but when you ride it for a couple of hours you do start to notice that your wrists are getting sore. And I'm 28 years old, so a lot of the people that ride these bikes are fairly mature, 40, 50-year-old, and it's definitely not a touring bike compared to something like a BMW S1000 XR or a Ducati Multistrada or a BMW GS. This here is not comfortable at all. It's probably quite similar to the ZZR 1400, and a lot of people as a result fit bar risers on here to raise the bars, bring the bars closer to the rider, and it's simply because it's a massive stretch to the bars. And one thing that does help is having that windscreen as low as possible, so you get a lot of wind hitting your chest, and it just lifts your body up, takes the weight off your wrists. So there's nothing wrong in my opinion with that standard screen. Another thing to note with this particular bike is the Gen 2 had a lot of the tabs for the fairing hidden away, so you can't notice it, and that's to improve the look of the bike for custom bodywork. So this bike was basically designed for the American market, where they go absolutely crazy with modifications on the bikes, and all the fasteners being hidden away where possible makes custom paintwork a lot easier. Now moving on to the engine, this is a 1340cc motor. It's not any wider, so the actual pistons aren't any wider, it's just the stroke up and down in the combustion chamber was increased by 2 millimeters. So that enlarged the engine from a 1299cc to 1340. You get a lot of people talking about maximum horsepower. It's all fairly irrelevant, to be honest. Whether it's crank or wheel horsepower, 190, 195, you hear a lot of differences, but all I can say is it's well over 185 horsepower. I don't know the exact figures. When you run the engine in, who knows, it could be more, could be less, but somewhere around the 190 horsepower mark, somewhere around 140 newton meters of torque, and the compression ratio was increased from 11.1 to 12.5 to 1, which improves fuel economy and engine efficiency. The bike also has lighter titanium valves, a new hydraulic tensioner for the cam chain, lighter pistons, ion coated rings and shot peened conrods. It's also got reed valves in the crankcase now to control pressure waves inside the airbox, and the fuel injection system was actually taken from the GSXR 1000 of the time. The fuel tank was increased from 20 to 21 litres for the Gen 2 in 2007. The silencers were changed to a 4-2 system. They're quite a heavy setup, so you can remove them, put something like a Yoshimura or a Scorpion or an Acroprovich system on there, and you'll save yourself a fair amount of weight, but you won't bypass the ceramic cartridges in here. This is where the catalytic converters are. There's two in there, little ceramic cartridges, so you'll need a full system to fully bypass the cats, but you can put a slip-on on there. You'll save a lot of weight. You might get a little bit of a horsepower increase, but not much. But in particular, I would say these silencers do suit the Hayabusa quite well, and I'm not a big fan of little shorty exhausts that are stuck on the end there, and it just ruins the actual look of the bike. I feel like it looks quite balanced as it is from factory with these silencers on. So if I were to get something as an aftermarket exhaust, I would go for an R77 4-2 system, because it's not a short system, it's quite a long end cam, and it suits the bike very well. Another modification from the Gen 1 was the swing arm. There was a lot of complaints about the swing arm being fairly brittle, a lot of cracking of the swing arm on the Generation 1, so they've improved the rigidity of the swing arm. And there is a common issue on the Gen 2 with this new swing arm. The paint, the finish on the swing arm peels quite a lot. Now you might not be able to see it massively here, but there is certain sections of this swing arm where I've actually touched up the paintwork on the bike. You can actually see I've touched up the finish on this swinging arm, so all this section here is actually hammerite brushed on. You can't really tell from a distance, but I know it's there. And there's a lot of complaints about the finish of the swing arm on this particular bike. Even up there, you can see a mile off there that I've touched that area up, so it's all smooth kind of over this area, but up here that's all painted over and it looks pretty awful. So that's one common fault with the swing arm on this bike. It's fairly poor finish, and you might find that it flakes off, and underneath it's kind of like a whitish colour, so you can see it a mile off, especially if it's a black swing arm. Another little issue that I get on this bike is how much this fairing here bulges out, so I've got a lot of wear here where my boots have been scuffing up against the bodywork. You might need some sort of protector on there, but it's too late for me. Another issue that I get with this bike is I could do with some rear sets, because the spring back on these pegs isn't good enough, and when I'm moving my feet about and I'm trying to get me, if I'm going around the right corner I'm going to want my toes on this peg, and if I go around the left corner I'll want my heel on it, and when I'm moving my feet back and forth it keeps flicking up, and when you're going into a corner it's pretty bad, this flicking up, because it really puts you off, upsets your body position, and then you've got to think about something else when you're going into a corner. Slight changes to the drivetrain. The Gen 1 was a 1740, this is an 1843, so you're gearing up the bike with the front sprocket but gearing it down with the rear, and 3 up on the back is quite close to 1 up on the front. Another thing to note is the reported gearing changes for the individual gear ratios. I'll put a picture up just now, and that basically shows you that the gearing's exactly the same between the Gen 1 and Gen 2. Now the Gen 1 and Gen 2 was reported to have first and second gear closer together and fifth and sixth further apart, but from that picture there you can see there's actually no difference whatsoever. The only difference is the final drive ratio here with the 2 sprockets. The instrument cluster then. So this works in such a way where if you switch the ignition on and then you press both of these buttons in, select and adjust, hold it, and then you can adjust the clock. So you adjust the clock by adjust the adjust button, so you go 7, 8, 9, then you press select and that takes you over to the minutes, and you can scroll through, press select again, and that's you finished. Okay then, so with the ignition back off, I'll show you the next thing that you can do, and I'll need 2 hands for this. So what you want to do is push the 2 buttons in, hold, turn the key, and that's with the fuel pump on, the ignition on, and then release the 2 buttons and you'll see the shift light is flashing. So what you can do now is press adjust on that shift light, so you can have it off, solid, or flashing, and I like to have it flashing. So this is basically when the revs climb to whatever you set the rev limiter to, this will flash to tell you to change up a gear. Now if you hit select, that now goes on to the brightness of this light, so you can adjust the brightness of that light. So now that's quite dim, and have it a bit brighter again. I'll have it there. I think there's 4 settings on that. Select again. This is your rev limiter now, so you can go from 4, 4.5, 5, 6, 6.5, 7, 7.5, 8, 8.5, 9. Then it goes up in 250 RPM increments from then on. So I'm going to have mine at about 10.5, 10,750 there. That's alright for me. And you hit select again, and I believe that's everything. That's all there is to adjust. Just looking under the seat, because I've not really seen many videos on this either. So the key goes in there, turn clockwise, and the seat pops up. I'll just place you back down here for a second. Plenty of room inside of here. I'll just carry some visor wipes, but inside here, now you can find pretty much anything in here if you buy a used bike. Now these drill holes aren't standard, but this is an Optimate lead that I keep in here. Just tuck that away in there. I've got some non-slip surface pads here for keeping things steady, and I've got another one in the back. Now I think this might be standard, I'm not sure, but there's little lugs here, so if you don't want to have these little bungee straps, you can put something in like a hair bobble, and you can actually mount audio recorder in the back of there. That's what I do, so I can capture the exhaust notes of the bike while I'm recording footage, so I don't get any wind noise from a GoPro. But in general, compared to most bikes, you can sort of see the depth of that there. You can fit quite a lot in, so I'll just pop this pack of wipes back in there, and you can see there's still plenty of room. This is an S21 Ultra, that's almost a 7-inch phone that slides in absolutely fine as well. Absolutely stacks of storage compared to your typical 1000cc sports bike. So the next thing I'm going to cover is the rear caliper. Now it's a single piston caliper, it does the job perfectly fine. I've locked the back wheel up a couple of times by mistake, just because I've been a little bit careless and pressed too hard on the pedal, but that just goes to show this bike will lock the back wheel up if you press hard enough on the brake and your caliper's not seized. So if you're having any problems with your rear caliper on a Hayabusa, especially a Gen 2 like this one, chances are you might need to get a new seal kit put in there and just have the piston freed up, get some new brake fluid and get some decent pads. Like I say, these are EBCHH and they're very good. They bite really well, there's plenty of feel, but make sure you're not pressing on them dead hard going into a corner, because you can just get the back end to step out a little bit, and it's quite frightening if you do it by accident, which I did. One thing I did notice when I was removing this rear caliper was there's not very much access between the massive silencers, and in particular this bolt here, and you can't really get in there with a torque wrench, so I just used a closed end ring spanner. Now this here is meant to be 33 Newton meters. The caliper locating pin is 15, and the caliper sliding pin's meant to be 17 Newton meters. And last but not least, I want to talk a little bit about the rear shock. Now it is very tight in there, there's no way you can really do any preload adjustment on that to the point where you can actually tell what your setup is. Now this is meant to be 195mm in length, the coil itself, for standard setup, but you basically have to remove it, set it up and then replace it to be able to measure how long it is. And you can adjust the preload on the fly if you want, but you won't be able to tell exactly how long the coil is, so you're just going to be going off feel. And you'd need a C-spanner right at the top of there, or you could probably just tap away with a flat blade screwdriver, as some people do. It's not recommended, but it is a common method for adjusting the preload. The next thing you can adjust is just above the coil itself. You can see the flat blade, same as the front forks. You can adjust that with a flat blade screwdriver. You turn it all the way clockwise until you feel resistance, bring it back to the first click, and that counts as 1, I believe, and then keep going a further 7 clicks until you're 8 clicks from the point in which you feel resistance when you're turning fully clockwise. And then the very last one is at the bottom of the shock. Now it's actually hard to find this one, and I'm gonna need to have a little look. You can just see it, but it's really buried away in there, and mine was actually Mine was actually a C solid. Now it's just in there. It's actually so hard to see, especially when you're looking at the camera, but it's just up here, just there where my finger is. Get the torch back on there, see if you can see it. It is. It's just up there where that light's shining now. Almost inaccessible. And that there is the only one that's different from the rest. And it's 12 clicks from clockwise, fully clockwise. 12 clicks rather than 8. This would be a good idea to just talk a bit about the Hayabusha's handling, the ergonomics, the comfort, the switchgear. Just get in front of this car. The first thing I want to talk about is the handling at high speed. That's the only problem I have with this bike, and it might just be mine, but the steering damper just a little bit too soft. When I go around the fast bend I can get a bit of a wobble. It might be the back shock as well. I think that the back shock might need refurb. It did look very rusty when I was walking around the bike, and you'll probably have noticed, and I spoke a bit about it when I was doing the walk around. So I think maybe a new shock, stiffer steering damper, and then that would absolutely make this bike perfect. Because every other way I could possibly review this bike would only end up with a positive review. I've got no qualms with anything. The engine is absolutely stonking. I've ridden an S1000 RR, I've ridden an R1, I've ridden a GSXR 1000, I've even been on a Super Duke R, KTM Super Duke R, and
The Hayabusa is just as powerful and torquey as the 1290 Super Duke, and this is a 21 plate as well, the brand new one. And I just thought the Hayabusa is about the same, between 4 and 9,000 RPM as the Super Duke 1290, and then obviously above 9,000 the 4-cylinder comes into play. To be fair, it doesn't rev out as much as some 1000cc bikes, because it's a 1340cc. You don't quite get that ultimate high revving top end, but the thing is, compared to an S1000RR, this bike here I noticed was a lot more torquey. It would get up to speed a lot quicker. Coming out of corners, it can be in any gear you want pretty much, and it will just pull. And bearing in mind it's got an 18 tooth front sprocket and the gearing's very, very long, it's just absolutely unbelievable the way it accelerates, and that's due to that massive torquey motor. And in comparison, the S1000RR, the GSXR 1000s, R1s, not even close on bottom end. They felt like 600s. And then when the revs start to climb up, about 9-10,000 RPM, it's just as fast as a Gixxer 1000, and you're talking like 12-13 plate onwards. And this here is a 2007 bike, so they can hang with more modern bikes, modern 1000cc bikes, lightweights. And this is heavy. It's a 250 kilogram bike compared to something around 205, 210 when you're talking about a super bike. But it really does not feel a lot heavier. It feels almost as nimble. And because the suspension is set up so well for the road, which it really is, it's more manageable, you've got more confidence when you're on the road. You go to lean into a corner, you set yourself up and get your feet position right, you get one bump cheek off the seat, you stick your knee out, you look through the corner, and if you hit a bump on a super bike, chances are your riding position is going to be messed up. But with this, your riding position stays where you want it because it just glides over bumps. I actually had my dad ride this bike coming off his GSXR 1000, and he said it was much easier to ride. He had much more confidence going into corners, and he was actually starting to explore more of the tyre. Like with this bike, I mean, I'm not an experienced rider at all, but even after 1 year I'm on the very edge of this tyre, and that's due to the fact that the bike is set up well. It's soft from stock as well. We're not talking about I've had the bike set up. The stock setup on this bike is excellent for the road. Fair enough, you could just go and unwind all the damping settings on your super bike, GSXR or whatever, and it might be better, but all I know is if you take a stock super bike and a stock Hayabusa, the confidence you have going into corners on the Hayabusa is so much more, and you can do it for longer as well, because having the soft suspension, and I'm not talking about wallowy, I'm just talking soft but sorted. One of the things is about having soft suspension is you can go faster for longer, because having that really stiff setup, you end up in a lot of pain very quickly. Whereas on this bike I can actually ride it. I've got a backpack on now and I feel absolutely fine. Fair enough, I'm in my 20s and a lot of people that ride these bikes are older, but it's much easier to ride this than 1000. The bars are a little bit higher, the pegs are a little bit lower. I've actually had my knee down on the left and the right side. and the pegs haven't bottomed out. This road's really bumpy now. There's a lot of bumps on this road, but I'm just not feeling them at all. I'm not feeling them one little bit. And one thing I've noticed with this bike is the throttle. The throttle is so well weighted, you never accidentally wind it on, whereas some other bikes like the modern S1000RR XR, the Super Duke GT 1290, you wind it on, get the front wheel to go right for a frisk, and then when you back off, you accidentally wind the throttle back on sometimes because it's so sensitive. But this is perfectly weighted. There we are, coming into a nice little left-hander down here. Just lovely, so smooth, so composed. People say you can't ride a Hayabusa fast. What an absolute load of rubbish. Fourth gear is fantastic on this bike. It's probably equivalent to fifth gear on most other bikes because the gearing's so long. You can do about 150 mile an hour in fourth. And even so, it'll pull from 40 mile an hour quite quickly. Just trying to stick to these 20 mile an hour speed limits here, but I can see there's a TL up front. Suzuki TL1000S or R, I'm not sure. Lovely bikes, V-twins. In fact, that V-twin, the TLR in particular, back in the 90s, one of the best sounding bikes I've ever heard. So meaty. Try and get past here. What a fourth gear. 70, 80, 90, and that's it just starting to come into the power band. This is not what you want. Ford Focus in the way with a white reg plate on the back. Do you not know the white one goes on the front, pal? This guy up front here, he looks like he's stiff as a board. And that's because I think all the bikes from the 90s, they're much more focused. Into a rhythm. Absolutely no dramas. Took that bend at what, 90 mile an hour? Indicated. Speaking about the brakes, like I was saying in the walk round, I think they're absolutely fine. There's plenty of power. Often I find myself braking and then I don't want to pull the lever any harder because I'm scared the wheel's going to lock up. And I never really feel like I need to use the back brake. I have had it rebuilt, but the front brake is more than adequate. for your two-finger operation. Don't go near the back brake when you're going into a corner. And the power's just so amazing. There's always torque there. You can just pull and pull no matter what gear you're in, no matter what speed. It's just so easy, and the wheelbase is long enough so that you're never finding the bikes getting flighty. Never ever feel like the bike's getting flighty. You don't need to slow down, you don't need to be ginger on the throttle coming out of a corner unless you're like right over, and then it's a traction issue. But even going over crests in third gear, you can just wind it on, and the sense of speed isn't that great because the bike's so big and stable. Whereas other bikes, I can imagine a ZX-10R C2H, that would be absolutely terrifying. Made it as far as Selkirk. We're just on the A689 now, about 10 miles to Jedburgh. Not a bad little road this, just the odd few little turns with hidden junctions. See that corner right there? I'd be like a bucking bronco on a stiff S1000 or a GSXR, but on this bike it just irons out all the bumps. Really nice. Nice little bend this. You only need the slightest of gaps. I prefer to be in fourth gear on this bike, just that little bit smoother on transition on and off the throttle. But like I said, the throttle position sensor on this must be excellent because there's just absolutely no accidental jerks forward or backwards. Probably something to do with the fact that the throttle handle itself is just nice and weighted. It's not like a little toy, plastic toy. I've had some serious bother in the past with that S1000R and the KTM. I can really feel the rucksack on my back acting like a parachute, but you wouldn't think I'm actually wearing one because I'm very comfortable. And the bike still accelerates like an absolute monster. Hate trying to get out on this bit, the A68. Bit of a nightmare. many police cars over this hill, so no, nothing. This is somewhere I can do a little top speed run, but it's really dangerous. Oh, normally do 186 up there indicated, but I'm trying to take it a bit easy.
So there we have it, my review of the Gen 2 Hayabusa. Pound for pound, one of the very best bikes you can buy. Mine owes me less than £6,000, and for that sort of money you can't buy a better bike. It does everything you need it to do. Plenty power, good handling, fair comfort, and it's got heaps of street cred. And to be honest, they're not going down in value at all these days. So if you like what you've seen today, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment, subscribe, and hit the bell icon and click all. That way you'll be notified every time I make a new upload. Thanks for watching.